Hi everybody, very welcome to Mentor and yet another video podcast. As always, I hope you're doing absolutely fantastic. So I'm doing this video because I've gotten so many questions about the fuel dumping incident that happened in Los Angeles 2 days ago, where a Delta 777-200 ended up dumping fuel over several schools on final approach into LAX. So what do I think about it? Why do aircraft dump fuel and what are the environmental impacts of it? Stay tuned.
Wind 31016, turn right, dead on. Turn 1 and 31 right. Delta 26.
Okay guys, before I start, I just want to mention that I will be in Berlin for the Pilot-Expo on the 21st and the 22nd of February. So if you want to come and meet up, there is a discount code here in the description of this video, which will give you free entrance into the expo. And apart from just coming and say hello to me, there's several other speakers and there's loads of flight schools, and it's basically a mecca for anyone who is thinking about becoming a pilot. So if you're in Berlin during those dates, get the tickets and come by and say hello. Right guys, so this is one of those rare occasions where I comment on something that is under an ongoing investigation. And the reason that I'm doing so is because no one was seriously injured and because there's been so much interest in this story. There's so many things that's written in the mainstream media which is factually incorrect or that they've just misunderstood, that I thought that maybe you guys deserve to have my side of the story. So basically what happened was that there was a Delta Airlines flight, the 777-200, that took off from LAX in Los Angeles and was bound to fly to Shanghai. And they had a completely normal departure up to about 8,000 feet. And at around 8,000 feet, they called air traffic control up and said that they had a problem with engine surges, as in with compressor stalls on its right-hand engine, and that they wanted to declare a mayday and return back to LAX. What they were talking about, a engine surge or a compressor stall, is something that I'm going to do a full proper video about. But to understand it, you have to understand that inside of the engine you have a compressor compartment that does exactly what it sounds like. It compresses the air prior to it reaching the burn chambers, and those compressors are basically small wings that are aligned in a row and that compresses the air. Now, under certain circumstances, if you have, for example, had a bird strike, or if there is icing inside of the engine or something else that is building up on those compressor blades, they can stall, just like a wing can do. And when they do, they start building up pressure. So because the air that's supposed to push back using those wings cannot do that. So it stops at one part of the engine, and that rapidly builds up a pressure. And that pressure can only go forward, it can't go backwards. So what you will hear is a series of what sounds like explosions, like which is also referred to as an engine swan song. But even though it sounds really bad, and sometimes you can even see flames shooting out through the tailpipe, it is not as bad as it sounds or looks. In fact, in most cases, we can just reduce the thrust on that engine, and by reducing the amount of fuel, reduce the overall suction in the engine, there's less pressure building up and the engine stops. And that seems to be what's happened on this flight as well, because they reported that they had gotten the compressor stall to stop. Right. So this is not great for the engine. It can, if it is allowed to continue, it can damage the engine badly. But if you do your memory items, from you reduce your thrust and you stop it, it's not that bad. You might actually be able to continue using that engine, but at reduced thrust. So it's not one of those critical malfunctions. So what about fuel dumping then? And why was it used on this occasion? Well, this is quite fascinating actually, and if you want to have a really good explanation about what fuel dumping actually is, well then check out Captain Joe's video that he did I think 2 years back about it. It's very good. But the easy way of explaining it is that these big kind of long-haul aircraft, like the 777, like the 747, for example, they are built to carry an enormous amount of fuel, as in hundreds of tons of fuel. This 777 had, when it reported it, to be about 212 tons of fuel in it. So when the aircraft has that much fuel in it, it's very, very heavy. And during the takeoff roll, there's not too much G-forces or stresses being put on the landing gear or the structure of the aircraft. So it can be very heavy and still take off. However, if that same aircraft want to come back again and land, well, in that case, it is just too heavy to take the stresses that will come from, you know, a proper hard or a normal firm landing. So because of that, you have a much higher maximum takeoff weight than your maximum landing weight. In the case of a 777, I don't know exactly the figures, but it can be several tens of tons of difference between the maximum takeoff weight and the maximum landing weight. Normally that's never a problem, because they fly these long intercontinental routes, they burn off all of this fuel, so when it reaches the destination, it's not an issue. However, if they have, like it happened here for the Delta Airlines flight, if they have a problem just after departure, well, then they haven't been able to burn any of that fuel. So all of that weight is still there, and they don't really want to come in and land with that, because they could be, even though they are designed to be able to take the stress from those overweight landings as well, they could be damaged to the landing gear, for example, or other structures. So I would guess that there's quite heavy maintenance inspections needed after a severe overweight landing like that. And because of that, close to this big international airport, there are designated areas where these big aircraft can go out and dump fuel. And they tend to be out of the sea or over a very low populated area. And the rule is that you cannot dump fuel below 6,000 feet. The reason that you can't do that is because the way that this happens is that when we dump fuel, and I should also point out that not all aircraft can dump fuel, like the 737 that I fly, we cannot dump fuel. That's because our maximum landing weight is fairly close to our maximum takeoff weight. It's only about 10 tons. In this case, it's not really an issue. But if we were to dump fuel, we open up valves that lets the fuel out into the airstream. And when that happens, the fuel hits the air that rushes by at maybe 200, 250 knots. And that airstream just smashes the fuel droplets into teeny tiny little drops that, because the fuel is very volatile, evaporates almost immediately. Okay? So if we are up at 6,000 feet or above that and we start dumping fuel, well, in that case, there's not going to be anything that comes down on the ground. It will still be there in the atmosphere. It's still not good for the environment, and it's definitely not something that the airlines want to do. Now, you know, the airlines are actually buying the fuel, so dumping fuel is a last resort. But if it needs to be made, then it's done in designated areas at a high altitude to avoid the, direct environmental impact that it will have. Okay. Now, what would happen if we dump fuel on lower altitude then? Well, if we dump it at lower altitude, the droplets will still be kind of smashed, but they won't have time to evaporate. So they will fall down onto vegetation or onto the sea, or in the case of this flight, onto these elementary schoolyards where kids were playing around, playing soccer, or, having a good time. Now, the fuel is not toxic, as in it's not going to cause any significant damage to the people involved, providing that they clean it off fairly quickly, but it's not great. I mean, it includes things like benzene, for example, which is quite toxic. You don't want to inhale or drink or get some of that in the eye if you can avoid it. But there's also other additives added to the fuel, which are there to fight fungi, for example, or bacteria that can build up inside of the fuel tanks or in the engines otherwise. So all of these things combined, the jet fuel and all of these additives, it's not good, and especially not for plant life and vegetation, which I'm sure that they're probably going to see in that area quite soon. So why did this happen then? All right, why did these pilots decide to dump the fuel? Well, first of all, this is impossible to know. That this is going to be a full investigation now, and I'm sure that once that investigation is concluded, we will know more about what the pilots were thinking. But generally speaking, if you have some kind of engine failure or engine problem, you have the option to just return back to the airport, and this is what these pilots asked for. When air traffic control asked them if they needed to go and dump fuel, they say negative, and they asked for a vector back for immediate return. And that could be an indication that the flight crew, thought that this was a fairly serious problem with the engine, and that they wanted to get the aircraft down as soon as possible for the safety of everyone on board. All right, this is a possibility. But then during the vectors back into LAX, well, then something very curious happened, and that is they started to dump the fuel without telling air traffic control that they were doing so. And the reasoning behind this, it's going to be up to the commander and the first officer to explain, but it is likely that they realized that 212 tons of fuel, almost a fully tanked 777, was a little bit too heavy for comfort. So they started the fuel dumping maneuver anyway. And I also want to make it clear here that a fuel dumping is not something that happens by accident. This is a full-blown procedure. There are several steps that needs to be followed. Those steps will be shown on the lower DU on the 777, and the switches that are needed to be switched on in order to initiate the fuel dumping are guarded. So it's definitely something that they did on purpose, and the only purpose you have for doing that is to lower the landing weight. If you start fuel dumping on a 777, it can shed between 1.4 and 2.5 tons per minute, and it will probably be the higher value now since they had so much fuel on board. If you, by the way, if you want to see a step-by-step discussion about the flight and in a really professional way, I highly recommend you to check out the Blanco Lirio channel. He's a guy that does great explanations of these kind of things, and in this case he also is using another channel which is a favorite of mine, which is called Vasa Aviation, where you can see the plot of the flight together with real-time ATC, and it explains a lot when you actually get to hear it. So check out the Blanco Lirio channel. I highly recommend that. So, what is likely to come out of this then? Well, anytime that there is something like this happening, there will be a formal investigation to it. Now, fortunately, this aircraft landed without any incidents. There was no one hurt on board the aircraft. There was people that were injured on the ground, as in, emergency personnel had to come there and help them. And Delta Airlines have tweeted out that they've been during the night there and helped clean the area to make sure that there will be as little environmental impact and as little danger to anyone around as possible. It is probably just going to be seen as a nuisance because it's like a fuel spill. Effectively, that's what it is. But once again, a fuel dumping should never happen below 6,000 feet. So there has been someone who has made some kind of judgment call here, and it's going to be up to the flight crew, like I said before, to motivate why they did it in this way. And it's going to be really, really interesting to hear the reasoning behind it. Now guys, if you like me commenting on current events like this, I am aiming to do more of that on the Mentor Pilot channel. But if you want to be in and discuss this with me and other aviation professionals and just aviation enthusiasts, come into the Mentor Aviation app chat, right? We have forums where we discuss, like this for example, and it's completely free to download. So you have the download links down here. I want to send a huge thank you to the Patreon crew as well. So you guys, you know who you are. The Patreons are the ones that are enabling me to make these kind of videos. Especially on short notice where I need to take time away from maybe my family or from my normal work to investigate and to research a video. Well, then it's my Patreons who are helping me to do that. So a huge thank you to you. And if you want to become part of my Patreon crew, well then use the link up here. I would love to see you there. You'll be able to preview my videos, and you'll also be able to, if you're on the $10 or more level, schedule a Skype call and we can have a kind of a one-to-one discussing what your targets and your goals are. Now, remember, Berlin, the Pilot Expo, 21st and 22nd of February. I hope to see as many as possible of you there. Have an absolutely fantastic day, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Right guys, I really hope that you liked that. If you want more content like that, more aviation content, well then check this out. I hope that you have subscribed to the channel and that you've highlighted the little notification bell. See you inside of the Mentor Aviation app and have an absolutely fantastic day. Bye bye.